examples to show side by side how they're the same and how they are different. Really great. And that language, everything you said was pretty much centered in a kid-friendly way. To provide an example, you also did that, right? So how many times do you think people have to use a word in order for them to acquire it in their own language? After you learn 17,
100,
21, 100. I don't know why you chose 17. 17 is it's pretty close. It's anywhere between 12 and 15 really regular uses where the student is using it and or anyone is using it and acquiring it in an authentic way, right? Without anyone kind of telling them this is how you use the word. 17 times, either in speech or in writing. So when we provide examples, we want those examples to be relevant to our students, which I'm sure you all include. Then you're going to ask a question. Ask a question that requires students to apply the word. Provide sentence frames to support the students to use the word correctly, and have students practice the sentence frames before they engage in conversation. Oftentimes with our students, you ask them to turn and talk, and then you say, okay, who wants to tell? Or who wants to share? And it gets quiet, right? Often it's because they're not sure if the way they're going to articulate or use the word is correct. They're more concerned, am I saying it correctly? Did I, especially at this grade level, did I not embarrass myself in front of my peers? So the sentence frame is going to give them that context. Okay, we're going to take a look at a video. And I just want you to think about, let me move to the next one actually, this video. So yes, so this particular video we're going to look at is a teacher, remind me her name.
Anita Archer.
Thank you, Anita Archer. And Anita Archer is demonstrating how she teaches vocabulary. And I want you to think about what kind of scaffolds the teacher is using. How did the teacher have students engage in conversation about the term? And then what did you see that might help enhance your own vocabulary routine?
So, looking up here, so we're going to expand on some of our vocabulary words. And the first word is what, everyone? Discard. And part of speech, it is a verb. And read the definition. If you discard something, you get rid of it because you no longer want it or need it. Okay, so when I get rid of something and I throw it away, another word for that is what, everyone? Discard. In fact, the synonym is what, everyone? Throw away. So if I clean up this room, as you two did this morning, you cleaned it up, and they found some paper and some pencils that needed to be thrown away. They did what, everyone? They discarded them. Okay, and so looking here, and read it with me, everyone, and starting here. What are some things that you should discard? Okay, and so everybody be thinking for a moment of your bedroom and some things that you need to discard. And begin by saying what, everyone? I should discard. My turn first. So I have a basement that is just filled with old books that no one wants. It's filled with overhead transparencies that teachers don't use. I need to, what, everyone? Discard them. I have cards. Every card that's been sent to me, I'm 64, every card that's been sent to me since I was like 5 years old, I have kept. Wow. And I have boxes and boxes of them, and I probably should discard them. Okay, and so first ones, then twos. Tell your partner something that you should discard and start with, I should discard. First ones, then twos, and go.
Okay, I'm going to pause here. What were some insights from the video?
She likes to keep stuff.
I'm sorry? She likes to keep stuff. She's a hoarder, right? Definitely. From 5 years old, she's definitely a hoarder. What else?
She made it real, you know what I mean? She
Mm-hmm.
related that word to real world, things that she has to discard. She made it relatable, for the students by giving examples. She kept repetitious. She kept, referring back to discard. And then she had some synonyms on there that were their language that they can, connect to the word discard.
The kid-friendly language, right? Throw away.
I like
Yes.
how she had prior planning. She had the ones and twos. So they already knew I was one and this one was a two. And then she went to listen to make sure they were doing it right. So I like her management style.
And she
Yeah.
had a visual.
Yes, and a very simple visual, and it's very antiquated because she
Yes.
said she had, what did she say? She had the
Transparency.
transparency right, that nobody uses. But the process is very strong. And who is using the language at this point? The students, right? The students are owning the language. Anything else?
Repeating it quarterly. She kept involving the kids in it, so they weren't disengaged every time they were using it.
Yeah, the repeated pointing while she was using the sentence. Good. Okay. And I'm sure we have some correlations in your own practice. So this word, camaraderie. Yes, friend.
Yeah, she also gave an example that everybody could relate to.
Absolutely. A relatable example.
Yeah.
Right? And for some words, it's going to be more difficult to give a
Yeah.
relatable example, like you carry it, sell. But for those words that are situated where we can really make that connection, that's where we have the most power. Absolutely. Thank you. So let's have a reader for the first bullet. Learning new words.
Learning new words without scaffold leads to little or no retention.
Okay, so if you just throw this word camaraderie to the students, say, "Oh, camaraderie, let's look it up. Let's find what the definition is," without any scaffolds like the Freire models that you all are using, very little retention. Vocabulary instruction includes what? Someone read that one for me.
Vocabulary instruction includes the meaning and structure of the words and how words serve a language purpose, i.e. pronunciation, parts of speech, connotations, word associations, frequency of usage, tiers 1, 2, and 3, and non-examples, etc.
Absolutely. So when we learn a word, it's not just the word that we need to learn. We need to learn how that word interacts with other parts of language. Okay? And then those scaffolds, such as the context, the sentence frames, and the non-linguistic representations by way of videos or images, are essential. Okay? So if this is the new word, camaraderie, someone describe what camaraderie is. What does it mean to have camaraderie? Friendship. Okay. What else?
Teamwork.
Teamwork. Okay, great. Okay, so this picture, right? Is this a picture that many of our students might relate to?
No.
No? They might not? You don't think they would relate to being on a soccer team? No?
Yeah, they would.
Yeah? No?
You
Why do you
said her
say?
students for sure.
Right? Okay. So this word comes from the collections unit in one of the, I believe it's a 7th grade unit. Okay, so this is camaraderie. Okay, so here's the question. So camaraderie, you can see in the picture, it may have something to do with friendship. So I want you to notice that I'm giving the picture first. Have I given a definition? No. Okay, and typically, not always, with the Freire model, we start with what? The word and then the definition. So this comes from the work of Dr. Ivania Soto out of, right here. It's going to come to me. She's very local. No. Not Fresno, off the 91.
Riverside?
No. Closer.
Northridge.
Merced?
No, closer. One of the cats. Thank you. Fullerton, Cal State Fullerton. I don't know why I'm having brain fog today. I had my coffee very late, so bear with me. Thank you. But she's out of Cal State Fullerton, and she does work with English learners, and she does something called EL shadowing. And one of the things she said is, in the thought, is to work backwards with the Freire model. And the idea is that you're building from the student's own schema, what they understand for themselves, and then you're working toward the definition. So I'm kind of modeling this for you. So the question would be, who do you share camaraderie with here at school? So the students might say, oh, my classmates, my friends, etc., right? Okay, then I'm going to give a non-example. Enemies surely do not share camaraderie amongst themselves because they do not trust each other. So camaraderie is a form of friendship, but what else is a condition of camaraderie? Does anybody know?
Trust.
What is it?
Trust.
Trust? What kind of trust? Mutualistic trust, right? So that is a nuance of camaraderie that might change with friendship. And now, ideally, we all want to trust our friends, right? But to have true camaraderie, you have to have mutual trust. Okay? And there's the definition. So do you see? So I started from the image and the word, and then kind of worked my way around, right? Mutual trust and friendship among people who spend a lot of time together. That's another condition. Right? So if you have a friend that's way across the country and you never see them, can you share camaraderie with that person? According to the definition, no, that would be the non-example. Okay? So in that same way, and this is her book, Ivana Soto, EL Shadowing. She says, start with the example, go to the non-examples, image and characteristics. It has an element of time and it does require trust. So how do we contextualize that? How would you say that to our friends, our students, right? What would you say? So your homegirl that you don't trust, is that do you have camaraderie with them? They're gonna say no, because she likes my boyfriend or she likes my friend, whatever, right? So that's where that connectivity comes in. And then the final, you notice it doesn't say final Webster's definition. What does it say? Class definition. And for some of the content words, right, they're just very straightforward. Like you carry it, you're not going to be able to get too far away from using the actual scientific terminology. But for words like camaraderie, other words like that, you can come up with that final class definition that speaks to what the students have been able to develop over time. Thoughts about this process or ideas?
Oh, I was just thinking about like the definition. I try to avoid the dictionary definition whenever possible, and just because they're too advanced. And there's a lot of, books or workbooks or something. It's not always possible, but I try to find even a lower grade glossary that I can photocopy or they already have or something.
That's tangible, right? Within their zone of proximal development. Webster's does have the kid-friendly definition. Typically, when I'm providing a definition, I try to find, if they have one, a kid-friendly definition. And they do a pretty good job of making it accessible. Thank you for that. So you can see that you're already, if you're using the Freyer model, you're already using the define, example, ask routine, right? Because you're providing examples. And then you can ask this simple question either at the front or the end of your lesson. Quick question, how many of you might consider starting from examples and working your way around and seeing how that might look in your classroom? What are your thoughts, Mr. Dada?
So I'm thinking that if they can come up with the example, then they have an idea of what the word is going to be.
Absolutely, and just giving, maybe front loading with a picture, just to start, right? Thank you. Okay, we were going to do this practice, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. Okay, so let's take a look at language clusters. How many of you remember this game? Or it still comes on now. It's back on. Do you know this game? Because I found like the oldest version of the picture. Do you know what this game is called?
Pyramid.
Pyramid? Anybody ever heard of this game? Pyramid? No? You've never seen it? So during the game, a set of team members, they sit across from each other. One person provides clues and the other person provides the overall category, right? So if we look at this, you would agree that these are all bodies of water, right? Okay, what is the distinction between an ocean and a river?
Salt water.
Okay, the content, what else?
I would say an ocean is like the Pacific Ocean, like a big, huge.
A very large body of water, right?
Between continents versus through a smaller body of water through.
Like states or
Good point. We don't have any oceans surrounded by land, fully surrounded by land, right? Or within the continent, for example.
Different marine life.
Different marine life. And so this idea, the reason why I showed you these examples is because especially for our English learners, especially for those newcomer students, what makes language so complex in English is typically there are like very singular terms in Spanish. Most of our 99.9% of our English learners, and especially our newcomers, are Spanish speaking. There are usually 1 to 2 terms for any one thing. But for us, we have chair, we have ottoman, we have couch, we have director's chair, we have stool, we have all of these different ways. And so again, just reading the words this way does not necessarily bring context for our students. Okay, so a reader for this quote.
Most native speakers
Thank you.
of English will acquire Tier 1 words through conversation, reading, and daily experiences. However, there are 2 notable exceptions. Students from lower socioeconomic status families and English learners. These students may require direct instruction in the basic Tier 1 words listed in this document.
Okay, so a caveat. So this is a quote from Marzano. Some of you may have heard of Marzano's research. Now we don't have time to go into all of the logistics of as to why specifically he's mentioning lower socioeconomic status families. It has a lot to, just to give clarity, it has a lot to do with the work, the amount of work that parents are doing and the amount of interaction between adults and children. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was coming up, you were not allowed to be a part of an adult conversation. That was a cultural nuance in my family. You didn't sit at the table with the parents and have a conversation among other adults. How many of you share that experience? Right? It might be right. Stay out of grown folks' business. Just direct, and it may not necessarily be socioeconomically inclined. However, there is a huge body of research that shows that because of the nuances of certain homes within a certain economic status, that there are fewer interactions between children and adults within the home in this kind of linguistically higher space. It's very colloquial, it's very familiar, it's very like home language, for example.
Children should be seen and not heard.
Right, and so what that plays out to is that the exposure to Tier 1 words is limited. Okay, so because this gets sensitive, right? Because even when I read it, I'm like, what are you saying, Marzano? But if we look at the whole body of it, we can understand what he's saying, and it's very true. And now the Tier 1 words, we'll look at that in a moment. What we want to think about is, how can we teach those? Well, the reality of it is, do you have time to teach Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words? Science words, words across content, and everyday language? Raise your hand if you have that kind of time.
If you don't follow the pacing guide.
If you don't, touche. If you don't follow the pacing guide, right? And so we have to figure out ways to kind of get that Tier 1 language built up, still instruct your content, right? And then make sure that students do have that exposure. And guess how many words? 2,845 basic terms. 2,000, right? So if students, and think about that, if you're reading something and you don't have enough content in the Tier 1, comprehension is out the door. You can't understand anything from Tier 2 or Tier 3 if you don't even have the Tier 1 language. Okay? So think about that, and I'll show you very quickly. In your free time tonight, when you have nothing else to do, you can look at all these basic vocabulary words, and you're going to see. Look at how he has them clustered. And it's very true. Oftentimes, students may have a knowledge of what something is, how it's used, but they don't know the term. How many of you experienced that in class? The student is trying to explain something to you, and then you realize that they know what something is, they just don't know the word, right? And so what Marzano has done is he's taken those words and grouped them together. And what he has found is that when students don't know these words, everything else filters out. Okay? So let's take a look. I know I'm moving very fast, so let me know if I'm going too fast. This is a little blurry, but bear with me. How many of you heard of those Tier 1, 2, and 3 words? Heard of that before? How would you explain it? Mr. Pena, how would you explain it?
Well, Tier 1 words, they're
Every day.
Just like this. Absolutely. Everyday language, right?
Yeah, everyday language.
Okay, and would you say our everyday language at this point has a higher or a lower academic framework as a society? Where are we? It's very colloquial, right, and very dialectical. A lot of our commercials There's a commercial for California cheese, and that commercial is in English and Spanish, so there's code switching. So our everyday language is very, very, very familiar, right? These are everyday words, right? And then what about tier 2 and 3? What are tier 2 words? Academic words used where?
All come.
Across all content. So if you're teaching in PE, you're talking about the steps to do a certain kind of exercise, right? So if you're doing a burpee, there is a sequence in how that is done. What kind of words are you going to use? First, you need to, and I haven't done a burpee in a million years.
I normally say you squat down.
Okay.
I'm gonna do it right now.
Okay. I love a good demo. Somebody's got to work out.
So, so I tell them, I say squat down.
Uh-huh.
You're gonna put your hands on the ground.
Uh-huh.
Kick out, kick back in, and then jump in there.
Okay, and would you say there's a sequence to that?
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? So when we're talking about tier 2 words, we're talking about words that are found in all content areas. So no matter whether you're teaching, whether Ms. Pinzon is working with Get Ready, you're doing PE, science and social studies, there's language associated with sequence. What kind of words come with sequence? First, what else? Next, then, subsequently, after. All of those phrases are essential to understanding sequence. What is really difficult for many of our students is that they hover here, especially at the middle school. They're right here, right? Where they may have some familiarity with those sequence words, but they're not synthesizing it from class to class, okay? And then the specialized academic words like eukaryote, you can't explain the 2 types of cells if you don't understand those words. And so BICS is our basic interpersonal communication skills. How many of you have traveled to another country in the last year? Ms. Pinzon, where have you gone?
Canada.
To Canada. Okay, so when you went to Canada, were you in the place where parlez-vous français? That's all I have.
Both.
Yes. Just right. And so, but you have, if I'm not mistaken, you have a little background with French, right? You have a little French. No? Okay. So were you able to have some interpersonal communication with folks? How did you survive that?
Everyone spoke English.
Everyone spoke English, right? Well, the case is true. The same is true here, right? But for our students, what we want to do is move them from this basic interpersonal communication skill to that CAUS, that cognitive ability to use academic language. Okay? How are we doing on time? Almost there? Let's see what time we have. 2:53. All right. So I'm not going to go into the actual activity, but I will say this is something to consider. When you're thinking about words, think about those tier 3 words and move backward, right? Because tier 3 and tier 2 words, they do require the direct instruction. Something to consider is when you are using the Freyer model, if that's what you're using, is to give students that opportunity to work the other way around. Yes, friend? Were you raising your hand? Okay. And then teachable moments. That's the only way we can figure out what students know in the tier 1, right? And encourage students to use the language of your discipline. So if they're in PE, if they're in science and social studies, ensure that they're using as much of that language as possible. And oftentimes, they do understand the concepts very, very well. They just need a little bit more support with the verbiage. I'll give you a little anecdote. So I was a classroom teacher, and I'm trying to think, I think it was 5th grade, and we were learning about the triangular trade route. Does anybody want to tell the group what that is? The triangular trade route?
Colonization and slavery and all that.
Okay, so the route between the Americas, right?
Yeah.
Africa and
Central
where?
America.
And Europe and the Central and South America. Well, very interestingly enough, a non-reader, said, I don't think it should be called the triangular trade route. And I said, well, why? And he said, because if you go from Europe to Africa to Brazil, and from Europe, Africa, or Africa, Europe to the Americas, and then back down to Brazil, he said that's a rectangle. It's not a triangle. Now this is a 5th grader. Think about how high level that thinking is. Right? I'm an adult, and I've never heard anybody propose any such thing. And the triangular trade route is this concept that is taught in colleges, right? And here's this 5th grader. But the student was only able to articulate that because he had ownership of the vocabulary. He was a non-reader. He was literally reading on the kindergarten, 1st grade level. right? So it's just something to think about as we are working with vocabulary, how vocabulary empowers the thinking. Raise your hand if you're highly techie, super techie. Raise your hand if you're kind of techie. Kind of techie, and raise your hand if you're paper pencil. You're still paper pencil, but you're very good at technology, Ms. Pinzoni. You're actually really good at it.
But I find that they behave better if they're writing, listening, speaking, and then if they're on their computer, they could easily go on another screen.
That they go to other things. So this is not my comment. This is just research. The research shows that one of the challenges we're having right now is students are not using paper or pencil, right? And the paper pencil, that whole process, if you think about SWAN math or you think about even in PE or other content areas, that movement of the hand in this way is highly connected to how your brain processes information, right? Everything from color coding to annotating text and the like. You cannot get that same absorption of words in the process of using a device. It does not mean devices aren't great. It doesn't mean we can't do Freire model digitally. But imagine the power in going back to a vocabulary notebook. Because we have notebooks. How many agree? I'm glad to hear that. If you need a notebook, I'll get you notebooks. If you need more notebooks, I know we have a lot of notebooks here, but we will get you more notebooks. And we'll go buy some if we have to. But just something to think about. Students like to express themselves very, very differently, right? So you can see even here, there's color code. How many colors? Who has colored pencils in their classroom or crayons or something, right? So we want to give the students an opportunity because the brain likes that pattern. So let's use a different way to do that, if we can. We can always use it digitally, right? And just a couple more words about EL scaffolds. You're going to see some things here that aren't necessarily connected. So what is a cognate? What is that? What is a cognate? Or cognate, depending on how you pronounce it.
It's the word in another, a word that sounds the same in another language.
Okay, give us an example, Ms. Pinzon.
Essential, esencial.
Mm-hmm. Action, what is it in Spanish?
Acción.
Acción. Okay, and cognates actually have rules. There are specific rules. So if a word ends in C-I-O-N in English, in Spanish, it will most likely end in what in English? T-I-O-N or C-I-O-N. It follows a specific rule. So I love it when students that are newcomers say, I don't speak any English. And then you say, okay, well, go ahead and highlight all the words you recognize in this English text. And they highlight, right? And then I say, well, all of those words, if you know what they mean in Spanish, you'll know what they mean in English, right? So one thing to support, especially if you yourself are not necessarily the speaker of the primary language of the student, is just ask them, how do you say this in your language? And then have them tell you. And then you repeat back to them the English version. You see, this is a cognate, camaraderie. Okay, same thing, cognate, and a lot of cognates in math and science for sure. Okay, let me go to the next example.
Mr. Joe, you guys came up with a really nice book in the other part.
The cognate practice, yes, and if you want an extra one, we have many. Thank you. So going back into those Greek and Latin roots, looking at the etymology of words, where it comes from. So this was interesting. It comes from the French, and it refers to fellow soldiers as comrades because they shared a room. So that's where that word comes from. And then extending word knowledge by analogies, right? A camaraderie is to friendship as comrade is to friend. And then shades of meaning, right? Giving kids multiple ways to express their knowledge. Okay, and with that, we have essentially reached the end. Feel free to watch the video. If you need any support with anything, any videos, any materials, or anything that we can do to support you, I know you're doing an amazing job. I do encourage you to use the Freire model backwards and see how it works for you and your students. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Thomas.
Okay, well, it is 3 o'clock. I hope you guys have a good day. If you have any questions or concerns, please let us know.